I think the direction of the new Thor is really rad. I think it's kind of surprising because Thor's such an iconic and well-known character. I mean, he's got his own movie series and everything. And at a time like this, when the Marvel movies are so hugely popular, so mainstream popular, to do something so drastic as change the character's gender is really interesting and I think pretty brave.
I think that Marvel is taking an interesting direction with Thor. I don't think that it's unprecedented. The moment they announced it, there were certainly mentions of other characters who have held the hammer and given the power of Thor. And it sounds that's where we're going with it, that there's going to be some act that causes Thor to be deemed unworthy, and someone is going to pick up the hammer and gain the power, and she just happens to be female. And I think that's an okay direction to go. I think this character is going to differ from the previous ones, specifically in terms of who's writing her and the directions that he will take her. Jason Aaron has definitely taken the character in some interesting places already, but at the same time, it would be interesting to see what he does with a female Thor.
I don't know how this is going to affect Thor's continuity, especially with some of the historical stuff like the Thor Core or Thor Girl right now, or any of the other Asgard titles like Loki, Agent of Asgard. Thor as a comic has been through a lot of changes. It's an older comic. There's a period of time where an alien was Thor, Beta Ray Bill, who's still around. There's a time for a little while where Thor was a frog.
I strongly suspect that we will see her as Thor for a good 6 months to a year. I am not expecting this long term. The most I would expect out of it is something along the lines of a Superior Spider-Man type run, where they went as far as 30 issues before reverting Thor back to Thor.
I don't think that the female Thor is going to stick around forever, certainly. I think she's at best temporary, hopefully for a couple of years. Comic books in general just are so stuck with the status quo, especially comic books from Marvel and DC, and it's hard to implement any permanent changes. I can't think of a single really major permanent change in the last, 3 decades that's stuck for more than 5, maybe 10 years at the most. I mean, Jean Grey is alive again. Jean Grey is always going to be alive again in some form or another. I hope that though she's temporary, the female Thor isn't some kind of gimmick just to get female readers. There aren't as many popular female comic book characters right now as I wish there were, but a lot of the ones that are out there are really, really awesome and have a really dedicated fan base and a really dedicated following. The one I can think of off the top of my head is probably Marvel's Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. And leading a little bit off of her would be Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan, who is probably one of my favorite female comic book characters ever. The way that G. Willow Wilson has written her just makes her so believable and so identifiable to any girl who's ever been that geeky teenager writing fan fiction.
In terms of the more successful female characters of the day, gotta be Storm. It's actually a lot of it is on the Marvel side. So Storm, Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, Kate Bishop of the Hawkeyes, and She-Hulk. That just translates. They're able to write a female character very effectively without turning her into boobs in a cape, which has been what's been happening to some of the female characters out there. And I think that's really the recipe for success is you treat the character like a superhero, regardless of their gender. You know, in a lot of cases, you take into account their family history or their background beyond just their powers. She-Hulk would not be as good a series as it is if it didn't have Jennifer Walters as a part-time lawyer who punches robots a lot. Miss Marvel would not be nearly as amazing without Kamala's background, without her being a Muslim American, without her being a giant fangirl and a huge geek, which is great.
No. Oh, sorry. That was just so no. I mean, did people stop reading Thor when he was a frog? Because if they stopped reading Thor when he was a frog, then you missed an amazing story.
Long-term effect, I would hope that it sparks an uptick in female readership, but I don't think that alone is going to do it, so no.